would anybody be shocked if they take another offensive lineman? We know that it's a strength. We know that they have depth. We know that they've got, and I'm not going to mince words here, the best offensive line coach in the National Football League with Stoutland. I know it's not sexy. I know some people will be ticked off, but I got to tell you, BLG, I'm not going to be surprised a little bit if they take another offensive lineman, and that's with Jason Kelsey coming back.
Right.
Because that's what the Eagles do. Give me a reason to think the Eagles are going to draft differently philosophy-wise than they have in other years under Howie Roseman's guidance.
Well, I can't. I don't want to do that because I think you're right. I think it would not be surprising at all.
Friday here on Birds 365, McMullen, McDonald, and BLG. Good to see Brandon Lee Gowton of Bleeding Green Nation. You know, you could absolutely be an NFL head coach or general manager because you got the good growth working. Did you see Howie looked a little trying to follow
you gotta be able to
footsteps.
get the 3 o'clock shadow.
3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock. Nick looks more 8 o'clock. Brandon and Howie a little bit more 3 o'clock, but at least the growth is there. You're looking good, bud.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you know, like when I think we can all, you don't have the hair up here, you kind of sometimes need the hair here to compensate here.
You gotta divert the eye. We all know BLG. Well, let's start with Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni. Jody and I were just discussing this, and I tend to anger people no matter how many times the Eagles say it. Nobody in this league believes they're not trying to get better at the quarterback position. They're doing their due diligence behind the scenes. Personally, I've never thought it's that difficult a decision for the Eagles. And I say this all the time. They like Jalen Hurts, but they're trying to get better. And they're happy with Jalen Hurts until they unveil a path to where they potentially can get a top 10 quarterback. Is that your take on the situation? Or do you think the Eagles are, no, we have made a decision. Jalen Hurts is our guy?
I think anyone would be naive to believe the latter when you consider how Jalen Hurts got on the Eagles roster in the first place when they had a franchise quarterback that they believed in, and they took one at number 53 overall anyway. So I don't think it would be wise to say they're just not exploring options at all by nature of how they view that position. And then just from the standpoint of, you know, you look at what the Eagles were able to do last year. Did they do some nice things? Sure. But I mean, they were far off, I think, from competing for a Super Bowl seriously as a team that really didn't hang in with the playoff teams that they played last year, and the quarterback position being a big part of that. So, and also just a standpoint of watch what I do, not what I say. And by all indications through reports and everything, we're hearing and have heard really since last year that the Eagles have had interest in Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson and these available options to them. And obviously we're looking at some of the top quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl, and I'm sure at the Combine as well. They're investigating all of that. So I think there's truth. There's more than one thing can be true. They like things about Jalen Hurts, yes, but they're absolutely going to look to upgrade if they can.
But you don't really think they're going to take a quarterback in the first round. They can look at the guys all they want and have their scouts' eyes trained on these young men. They've got 3 first-round picks. One of them's not going to be on a quarterback. Do you believe that it could?
I mean, if someone falls to one of those picks, let's say there's a quarterback who isn't off the board at that point. I mean, it might be the right range of like, hey, we have these picks. Why not take a chance on a guy? We think this is a really interesting prospect. I think in most years you wouldn't think that way because I think it's kind of tough to do that if it's your only first round pick. But with 3 and you not being settled at that spot, I think there becomes a point where the risk might just be worth it. The upside might be worth taking a chance on someone like that, especially in a situation, let's say it's Malik Willis, for example, where he doesn't have to come in and start right away, and you can kind of bring him along as people think he is going to need to be brought along in the NFL. So do I think it's the most likely outcome? No, but I think there's like a 30% chance, if I have to say, like a sizable chance.
All right, you threw out that percentage, so I'm going to ask you for another percentage, BLG, and that is a percentage that Howie Roseman will take 3 first-round picks.
Zero. I don't see how. I mean, maybe 3 first-round picks if they move around at some point, if they trade down from, let's say, 19 or whatever into the late 20s or 30s. But I just don't think there's any chance they stick at 15, 16, 19 and make all 3 of those picks. I don't know how they could, in terms of, you would obviously like to get a first round pick next year if you're sticking with Jalen Hurts and have that ability to maneuver, have that flexibility, optionality, a little Sam Hinkie term, if you will, there. I just think it would be crazy to me if they just used all 3. I don't think that's going to happen.
All right, Howie Roseman, in speaking the other day, at least my ears perked a little bit when he talked about, with Jonathan Gannon being a coach that they're just renting because he believes that someday he's going to become a head coach in the National Football League. Shoot, it could have been this year. Didn't happen with Houston. But giving props to Gannon and saying, yeah, we need to get players that fit what our coaching staff wants to do. And if you're talking about defense players, it's Gannon. And he basically hinted at the linebacker position. We'll evoke the name again. Jerry Robinson, 1979. Last time the Eagles took a first-round linebacker. Could that streak end this year, BLG? Did you hear that, reading between the lines with Howie Roseman the other day?
I mean, I think we'll all believe it when we see it happen. I think that's what it comes down to. Having 3 first-round picks increases the chances it could be this year, just from a statistical, mathematical standpoint. I'll believe it when I see it. I do think there is some level of truth to that. I think a linebacker in this system is different than a linebacker in Jim Schwartz's system, as Howie was talking about. Yes, I believe there's truth to that. But again, I still think there's enough evidence here dating back to, beyond Jim Schwartz, when the Eagles, when Howie Roseman first came into power, really, that this is just not a position they invest major resources into. So until they do that, I can't just assume it's going to happen.
Now, Howie is famous for not obviously showing his hand very much, but he showed his hand in Indy. He basically said, "Oh, we're taking an edge rusher," and then joked, he probably went too far down that route. But so since we're doing the percentages, I'm going to go 100%. The Eagles get an edge rusher. Is that where you are, Brandon?
I would be shocked if they don't leave the first round with an edge rusher. I mean, it makes too much sense in terms of, this is a position of need. It's a position of importance. It lines up with this draft class. There's going to be some kind of edge rusher, I believe, unless there's this crazy run on them somehow before number 15, which I guess isn't impossible. But I feel like if that's the case, then there's probably going to be some other good prospects, other positions that will still be on the board. I think it's either David Ojabo or Jermaine Johnson. I think one of those 2 players, I feel strongly, is going to be an Eagle, just based on what I think where they're going to fall and also what the Eagles value. So I think there's going to be a guy there for the Eagles, and I think they're absolutely going to take an edge rusher, in part, again, because they almost have to. It's a huge need, and it makes a lot of sense.
If they move one of the picks, move down, move out, and take a 2022 pick, and they end up with 2 picks, would anybody be shocked if they take another offensive lineman? We know that it's a strength. We know that they have depth. We know that they've got, and I'm not going to mince words here, the best offensive line coach in the National Football League with Stoutland. I know it's not sexy. I know some people will be ticked off, but I got to tell you, BLG, I'm not going to be surprised a little bit if they take another offensive lineman, and that's with Jason Kelce coming back.
Right.
Because that's what the Eagles do. Give me a reason to think the Eagles are going to draft differently, philosophy-wise, than they have in other years under Howie Roseman's guidance.
Well, I can't. I don't want to do that, because I think you're right. I think it would not be surprising at all. But I would say I don't think they should do that unless it's a situation where, there's a player, and obviously Tyler Linderbaum has been connected to the Eagles more than a few times at this point already in the offseason, and him himself saying, Jason Kelce, as a player comparable to him, which we've all heard. I just think unless he is clearly the head and shoulders prospect at that spot wherever they're picking, and is way better than everyone else, I don't love the thinking of that pick, because you just mentioned, you have Jeff Stoutland, arguably the best offensive line coach, or at the very least one of them in the NFL. And I think we've seen him be able to consistently do more with less. So, and they obviously have all these kind of developmental guys on the roster, and maybe they won't pan out. But I think like investing time into Coyote Awashika and Nate Herbig and Brett Toth and all these, and Jack Driscoll and all these kind of guys kind of behind the scenes. I mean, to me, it's like, what's the point of doing that if you're also going to expend your most premium resources on that position? I get the offensive line is important, but I just feel like Jeff Stoutland should be able to do more with less there, as opposed to like a position like wide receiver, where that's really, for the most part, maybe outside of Quez Watkins, never really been the case for this team. And obviously like edge rusher too. I just don't think that's the best use of resources for this team.
Yeah, poor Jeff, man. We expect so much of Jeff Stoutland. We're like, just make something out of Coyote Awashika. And we expect it, and maybe rightfully so, as you mentioned, Brandon, because, Jason Kelsey, you go back to that. Now, obviously, Jeff wasn't here when he came in, but he was a 6th-round pick, continued to develop. Jordan Mailata is a 7th-round pick. We know his history. I think 21 of the 32 starting left tackles in this league are first-round picks. You have to invest a first-round pick in a left tackle, and the Eagles got one in the 7th round who didn't know how to put on a football helmet when he got here. It's pretty amazing what he's able to do. But I want to shift gears into free agency, because I understand everybody loves talking about the draft, especially with the combine, but it becomes a lot clearer after teams sort of hint where they're going in free agency, and then they can focus in on what their obvious paths are going to be in the draft. What do you think the Eagles are going to address in free agency now that they have at least a little bit of money to work on?
I think the Eagles will be looking to make some moves. Like, obviously it's not going to be so much like last year where they sat it out in a lot of ways, other than, getting some like really bargain deals and kind of having to wait for those. I think it's a little bit more aggressive than that, but I don't think, they're looking at top of the market signings. I don't think they're looking to break the bank by any means. I think they're going to be looking at players who might be undervalued for one reason or another, maybe someone coming off an injury, or not totally unlike Anthony Harris last year when they signed him, or someone like, who was in a situation like a wide receiver. I think that's an obvious position they will almost have to add someone at, because they just don't have enough there. And I don't think it's necessarily going to be like Chris Godwin with a market-breaking contract, as it could be someone like, a DJ Chark, coming off an injury, or it could be someone like Allen Robinson, who didn't had a down year last year, but in part because you could say he was playing with a rookie quarterback who really wasn't ready to play in the NFL. So maybe the Eagles look at that and they're like, or Juju Smith-Schuster, who was like, hey, this is a good player, and his value kind of got hidden a little bit because he was saddled with a bad quarterback and a quarterback who couldn't maximize him. So maybe we can kind of get him here at a discounted rate, and we can really boost him up in our offense, and he'll be a better fit here. So I think that's the kind of mold they're looking at, is guys who might be undervalued and underappreciated somewhere else. So they're not paying this huge contract to them as much as they're trying to get a nice bargain.
BLG, let me ask you about a player that John and I agree on, because we've been batting back and forth the draft over the last 4 days since they've been out in Indy. Both John and I think Kyle Hamilton is one of the 2, 3, 4 most talented players in the draft. He's a safety, and there are other positions that seem to be NFL-driven, more of a need, pass rusher, Eagles. But if you're just grading pure talent, he's got to be in the top 5 and probably in the top 3. Eagles absolutely have a needed safety. Things seem to be adding up here for Kyle Hamilton. Who's drafted? Bucky Brooks from the NFL Network actually put out his second mock, and he had Kyle Hamilton falling all the way to 15th to the Eagles. And both John and I said, from his keyboard to God, the football god's ears, I don't think that's happening. I think he's going to be gone. How high will the Eagles have to trade up? First question is, how high do you think they will have to trade up if they want to get him? And then, of course, the follow-up is, do you think the Eagles would do something like that for as talented a player as Kyle Hamilton in a position that they had previously not put a ton of value on?
Well, yeah, we talk about, the Eagles don't draft linebackers in the first round, or at least they haven't in a long time. I mean, they've literally never taken a full-time starting safety in the first round ever. So that would be unprecedented, and in a big way. And I don't think the Eagles will be looking to move up in this draft very far. If they do, if that situation does arise, I think it's something like the Devontae Smith situation last year where they move up like 2 spots or so, a small move up. We've seen them do that plenty of times before. I don't think they're jumping from 15 to 6 or 8 or something like that drastic. I just don't think they want to do that. I think they want to make multiple picks here and increase their chances, increase their hit rate. So I don't think that's really likely. Although, like you said, safety is a big need. Ryan McLeod is a free agent. He said he wants to come back. We'll see if the Eagles want him back. I would think they would have interest in that, especially what you could probably sign him at. I think Anthony Harris will be gone. So I think that's a position actually the Eagles will actually look to address in free agency. There's a strong safety market out there. There's also a free safety market out there. It's just a little bad safety pun there. I think there's plenty of options. Someone like Justin Reed makes a lot of sense. So I think it's possible that even before the draft comes, they'll kind of have that hole filled in sense of they'll sign a free safety, let's say maybe like a Justin Reed. They'll have Rodney McLeod back. And then obviously Marcus Epps. I think they feel good about him as a guy who's part of that rotation.
Now, Brandon, you mentioned you don't expect the Eagles to make a big move up, maybe a couple spots. I do want to talk about a, sort of an organizational philosophy standpoint. We all say, I think most of us, and you mentioned, I certainly don't think Howie's going to take all 3 of those first-round picks. I think he'd like to kick back into next year's draft and get an extra first-round pick, but you always need 2 to tango. You don't often have 3 first-round picks in this league. It doesn't come around that often. Does that create more of a sense of urgency to get things done now? Whatever your plan is with quarterback, edge rusher, Kyle Hamilton, difference-making type player. Is there more of a sense of urgency because you have that draft capital and you got to make it count because you're not always going to have it, no matter – you may want it. You may want to roll it over, but it doesn't mean you can roll it over.
Yeah, I mean, it's a critical offseason. I think especially in the vein of quarterback, you have to really think about that. And it's a lot of people want to say, hey, the Eagles are not close enough. They're too far away to add a quarterback right now. Well, I always look at their ammo that they have, and I think like, well, you have this now. So I don't know that you're going to be in a situation next year where, let's say, Jalen Hurts is kind of more of the same, or even takes a step back, and then you're like, well, now what? We're probably too good to have the number 1 overall pick or anything close to that. So we might not be able to draft one, even though the class is on paper right now looking more intriguing than this year's class. And, those things can be fickle, I feel like. So we'll see how that goes. But at least right now, they're probably not going to be good enough, obviously, at that point where they need a new starter or they're going to be in that market. So that's why I feel like they have to trade down. And to your point, John, I mean, it doesn't mean you just can, because there has to be a willing trade partner to be able to do that. So that's kind of the tough spot that they're in when it comes to the quarterback decision, and why it might create urgency to really figure that out now, because you can't just assume you can get that pick next year and everything. And there will be a light at the end of the tunnel in that quarterback situation. So to me, it's like, if you can get a quarterback now, do it. Like, don't be like, we can kick that can down the road, because you don't know if there's going to be an answer at that point.
BLG, the first day of workouts yesterday at the Combine, skill position players galore, quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends. One group left to go. That's the running backs. Eagles in the running back position. Miles Sanders on the last year of his deal. Will they extend? Will they try and get something done? Boston Scott is a restricted free agent, so they'd have to slap a tender on him. Jordan Howard is completely free. He's a free agent that has a good relationship with the Eagles. They'll probably be able to get him back if they want to get him back. Let me go to the guy in the middle, Boston Scott. In watching the running backs this week at the Combine, it kind of goes hand in hand with Boston Scott. If you think that it's a great class, oh my God, we're going to be able to get a guy who can step in and surpass Kenny Gainwell year 1 on the roster, it probably is going to cut Boston Scott's possibility of coming back to this team. where do the Eagles sit running back wise in your mind? How important is this week? Do you think they're making it a priority to find another running back in the draft because they've got question marks attached to those that they've got on the roster right now?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think it's more about the long term too than it is, because obviously they're going to have Miles Sanders back, assuming they don't trade him this year. Jordan Howard, I'm guessing, might not be, and I think the Eagles would ideally like to add a player in his mold, probably on like late day 2 or more realistically day 3, who is that kind of bigger back, that bruiser. And I think they can probably find that. That should be available to them. In theory, I don't think running back should be, this high priority from the standpoint of their offensive line is probably going to be able to get yards for whoever, almost anyone who's back there for the most part. Boston Scott's an interesting, name here because he's going to be a restricted free agent, as you mentioned, and I just don't think the Eagles are going to be looking to pay him the $2.4 million it would take for the lowest tender level that they could give to him. If you look at that, that's like top 30 running back money in terms of annual value, and I don't think the Eagles are looking to pay that, especially into a part-time player, as much as they like Boston Scott. And I don't know that there's going to be this, crazy market for Boston Scott if he does hit free agency. So they have some decisions to make there. I do think they'll be looking to add a day 3 back to kind of fill that Jordan Howard role. And then maybe possibly more if, depending how they feel about Miles Sanders. But yeah, I think day 3 is the spot for them.
Well, let's talk about Miles, BLG, because that is a difficult decision for the Eagles. They're not going to extend him. They basically said that this year. So final year of his rookie deal. We all know he's talented, but I think he's topped out at whatever, 867 yards, I think, was his best season. I look at it. If Miles Sanders finally turns into what we think Miles Sanders could be, a 1,300-yard back, that's going to cost, $6, $7, $8 million. We talk about the Eagles don't value linebacker, they certainly don't value. They don't want to pay a running back. Sir, anyway, Miles Sanders is back, because if he underachieves, the Eagles aren't going to want him. All right. Thanks for the memories, Miles. Your rookie contract's done. And if he finally turns into a true running back 1, he's going to be too expensive. Is there any way out of that?
I think you can look back, like the case for Miles Sanders is you look back to when the Eagles drafted him and how he talked about basically like everyone in the building there was in on Miles Sanders in terms of analytics department, scouting staff, coaching staff. And that's not necessarily the case for every pick that they're totally unified. So I think there are a lot of Miles Sanders fans in the building, at least when you go back to that. But there are concerns. Like, again, he's coming off his worst season in terms of volume. Obviously, he did his best season in terms of efficiency at 5.5 yards per carry, but the volume is important for a lead running back. There were actually 32 running backs last year who had at least one longer run than Miles Sanders. And obviously, we saw
that was a surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we saw the home run hitting ability in 2020, but we didn't see it there last year. I think he has not been a standout in pass protection. I would not say that's a strength for him. There were some issues last year where like he only fumbled once, but there were kind of like near fumbles that we saw in there, which you don't love to see. And going back to college, that's always been a concern for him is ball security. So I just think there are kind of too many red flags here to certainly sign him to an extension. I think if he has a good year in 2022, you can franchise tag him because that number will not be perfect, but it'll be reasonable, especially relative to other positions. You could keep him that one more year if you really feel like we can get one more year out of this guy. But I just think back to like look at the production the Eagles had last year with Jordan Howard, who thought he was done. Like he didn't think he was going to be able to play anymore. And Boston Scott, and the low level of resources the Eagles invested into them and the great production they were able to get out of them because of their offensive line and their run game and everything, how they scheme it up. So I just don't think it would make any sense to invest significant resources into that position.
BLG, something John and I have talked about a bunch of times during the last few weeks, and I don't think we've had you on since we had the conversation, so I need your take on this. John and I both like consistency on football teams, on any sport, any team in any sport, to be truthful with you, but consistency is usually considered a good thing and a strength. But consistency all across the line is where I'm questioning. Go back as far as Andy Reid. His coaching staff was changing because guys were getting a chance to jump off and become head coaches. Chip Kelly changed his coaching staff around. Doug Pederson, although sometimes not necessarily of his own choice, changed his coaching staff. As of right now, the Eagles coaching staff is coming back en masse. That, yes, Gannon got an interview for the Texans head coaching job. Could have left, didn't. He's coming back. A couple other guys talked to other teams during the offseason. Nobody got the jobs. So they're all coming back as a group. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's fine. I don't think it, makes worlds difference. It is interesting to note, as you said, just setting up the framing there, because in past years, it seems like they would tweak at least something every year. We've seen a number of changes. I think even coming after the Super Bowl, obviously some coaches got hired, or even the year after the Super Bowl too. Like there was some contracts that were not re-upped.
They fired the training staff. You remember after the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So even when they've had success, there's been changes, and not just because Frank Reich is getting hired by the Colts or John DeFilippo is getting hired by the Vikings. So it is a little surprising from that standpoint. I think the goal in mind last year when they hired this coaching staff, we all saw it. They're hiring a bunch of guys who are pretty young, relatively speaking. And I think, the thinking was we want this coaching staff to grow together and we want them to grow into something. And I guess that's what they're sticking to. They're like, hey, we saw potential here. We're going to stick with it and we're going to see where it goes.
Where there has been change, Brandon, is the personnel department. And, leading up to the draft, obviously the Eagles lose Ian Cunningham to the Bears and Brandon Brown up the turnpike to the Giants. Who knows? Andy Weidel might be the Pittsburgh Steelers GM, but that won't come until after the draft. The Eagles are deep. I always look at Cincinnati, and I joke, it's Duke Tobin and 3 interns, and the Eagles they were 21 deep in the personnel department when Ian and Brandon were here. Any concern about losing those guys, especially in draft season? Because it's significant, but this team does place a lot of assets into the front office where there is no salary cap.
I think the way that Howie phrased it was, it's not ideal. And I think that's, the way to put it. It's not what you would want. It's not the perfect situation. It really shouldn't be an excuse for we can't have a good offseason now because we lost Brandon Brown and Ian Cunningham. And that's not, I'm not trying to belittle them. I'm just saying you should still have enough to be able to move forward and overcome that. It isn't ideal, but that's kind of the nature of the situation now. And, I think part of the reason, or one of the things that I think about is, Jeffrey Lurie credited Howie Roseman, I think it was at the end of 2020, about his ability to kind of stock that pipeline of front office executives. And the Eagles obviously added former Jaguars GM Dave Caldwell last year. So maybe he takes a bigger role. And again, that's why you add someone like that, because when they added him last year, it was kind of a vague title. Yeah. And maybe now there's, more room for him to kind of step up and have him contribute. So that's my thinking with that is okay, now it's time for some of these people that you added and have been in this pipeline. And Jeffrey Lurie, when he spoke at the end of the 2020
he was
season,
right. You got to give him credit where credit is due.
He said, right. What? We have five future
GMs.
So, if that's the case, then you shouldn't be understaffed. You should have people who are ready to step up. And obviously, Catherine Rach is in the mix there and interviewed, and she takes on a bigger role too. So I guess if you just go by what they say, they should have enough still.
All right, BLG, last one for me, and I love my hypothetical questions, so I'm going to run one by you. Let's say Tom Brady still wants to play football, and he's dropping hints on it all over the place. Mm-hmm. And the Eagles go, damn, if we're not sure about Jalen Hurts and we're not taking a quarterback this year, and why don't we just get Tom Brady for a year and make Eagle fans happy that we can make a Super Bowl run? But you can't really call Brady directly because he's under contract to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which he kind of, in all these comments he's making publicly, is looking right past. So you can't talk to Brady, but you can talk around Brady. Who do you call? His old man, his baby mama, Bridget Moynihan, Julian Edelman. Gronk's on the contract to the Bucs, so you can't call him either. How do you formulate a plan to try and go around the NFL's rules and guidelines to get a message into Tom Brady going, we won't even force cheesesteaks on you. We know it's a TB12 thing. We'll do whatever it takes to keep you nutrition perfect. How do you reach out and at least get a message to Brady that we'll take you for a year, Tom?
So I got to give credit to my dad here, who shortly after I think the Bucs lost, and those rumors were circulating at first about Tom Brady retiring, I kind of brought them up to him. And he was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And he's like, "Why would he do that?" And it's like, "Well, there's talk that his wife wants him to retire." And my dad was like, "Oh, he's done. He's gone." So so maybe it's that. Maybe you have to talk to Giselle somehow, get in touch.
Gotta go.
It's always. Trust me. It's always
the only one.
Yeah, it's always the wife. And last one for me, BLG, BleedingGreenNation.com. Read them there. BGN Radio, listen to him. SB Nation NFL. So let's talk league wide. Let's talk Doug Pederson.
Sure.
I think Jacksonville is a great spot for him. I mean, I'm concerned about the Jaguars front office, the way they run the organization, but they seem to be putting a lot on Doug's plate, which he didn't get here. And man, I love the quarterback situation. I know how bad it was with Trevor Lawrence, but I still think that is a top-tier level prospect at the quarterback position. And they got nowhere to go but up. He's set up for a short-term spike. He's got every opportunity to prove the Eagles were wrong when, they gave him 3 years basically after a Super Bowl championship.
I think Doug looks refreshed. I think that's a big way he said it himself. He feels like he has like a new lease on life, but you could just see it. I feel like in his energy, how he looks. I mean, just thinking about even going into the 2020 season, he looked beaten down. He looked tired. He looked exhausted, and understandably so. So I think being away did help him. I think being in Florida is certainly a nice fit for him. I think that helps a lot. So I think Doug has a real chance to succeed there. I don't know what the ceiling is again for that team because, as you mentioned, John, you have Shad Khan there, you have Trent Baalke, and Shad Khan specifically has overseen one season with 6+ or more than 6 wins. Yeah. So it's tough to say, Doug is able to, bring this team to the Super Bowl or anything. Although I did like his answer this week.
I love that answer.
Yeah. Doug has some swagger.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's something we saw imbued into the 2017 team. So I think what Doug does there, though, is he raises their floor. They're not like, they're not going to be picking number 1 overall for the 3rd straight year. They're not going to be a joke of a program like they were under Urban Meyer, who just wasn't even a real NFL head coach in a lot of ways. Like Doug brings credibility. He knows what he's doing. He's not like, totally out of his element and out of his depth here like his predecessor was. So I think Doug is going to bring some stability there. And you mentioned it, the quarterback, the division isn't great. So he has that working for him too. I think there's definitely reason, for Jags fans to be excited, and honestly Eagles fans to kind of be excited about what Doug can do down there, and obviously hope that he has success, except when the Jags come to Philly this season.
Nick better win that game.
That will be a fun day to see how Doug is received. Methinks it's going to be pretty good, and I hope Nick Sirianni doesn't get butthurt about it. But we're months away from dealing with that. You got a couple hours to relax, have a nice lunch, and then get ready to watch hours and hours and hours of guys sprinting and lifting on the NFL Network today. BLG, always a pleasure, buddy. Thank you much for hopping on board.
Thanks, guys.
Brendan Lee Gowton from Bleeding Green Nation here with us on Birds 365. All right, quickie timeout coming back. Mac put a bow on the show.